ओके अस्सलाम वालेकुम एवरीवन। कितने लोग मुझे नहीं जानते? रेज योर हैंड्स। सही, कम मेहनत करनी पड़ेगी। ठीक है, गुड। अच्छा, माय नेम इज़ Ahsan Ayaz. I'm currently working as a software architect in a US based company. It's called Modus Create. So I work remotely from anywhere I can. Um, I'm a Google developer expert in Angular, and there are around 75 experts in Angular in the world. And currently you are with two of them. So Mashood is the first one from Pakistan, and second one from Pakistan. I'm an expert in Google who is acknowledged by Google, in short. And I'm a part of Angular Pakistan. Um, like we organize events and stuff. I'm also a part of Devon Code, which is run by Kamran Bhai. It's a community which brings new speakers, and it collaborates with other communities to organize several meetups and stuff. I'm supporting NG Girls so far. The events have been super awesome. So if you have girls in your circle who are interested in Angular, um, do make sure to let them know about NG Girls so they can join us in the next event and probably learn about Angular. I'm founder of IOMX, which is a pretty decent startup. I have like 6 people working with me currently, and we work on different client projects on Angular, Ionic, React, and Node.js. So those are our expertise. We usually have clients, international clients, not local, but we are kind of expanding towards that direction as well. So if you have someone who is looking to build someone, recommend us to them. I'm also running Node School Karachi, so if you are interested in learning Node.js, it's a community which is focused on Node.js and focused on teaching people Node.js. So we gather, we do a meetup, and then we tend to learn something together. So if you want to speak, if you are already a Node.js developer and you are experienced, you can speak on our events, which would be coming forward in like a month or so. If you want to reach out to me, this is my Twitter handle, Ahsan_AYZ. I could not get the AYAZ, so I picked this one. If you want to reach out to me via GitHub, you can look into my work that I have done. I've actually contributed to a number of repositories, including Angular CLI. So if you have worked on Angular CLI, your machine has my code. I've also contributed to Ionic. Ionic 4 is coming up real soon. It's currently in beta 11. So I've contributed to Ionic 4 as well. I've worked with a developer advocate of Ionic on a starter template as well. So if you have worked with Ionic, you might have seen tabs starter, blank starter. So I've worked on one of those as well. So yeah, that's pretty much about it. And I'm gonna go and jump to the real slide now. So everyone can hear me till the very back? Perfect. Okay, so we are gonna go through one thing which was really painful in AngularJS, right? I've been working with Angular since its beginning, and I've worked through all of the upgrades, all of the patches, and then from 1.x to 2 to 4 to 5, 6. So I work extensively on projects which could be like, I've worked with one project named Got202. Faris was with me. I worked in Coda Labs, and I worked on that project for like 2 years, I think. And it was kind of a project which, if you take out Facebook's events module, like creating events and then inviting people to it. So it was a large-scale project. So we were able to create a lot of reusable components. So I've worked through the change detection of Angular a lot, and it was a pain. And why? We'll go through the next slides and see why that was it. So this is the agenda of the talk. We would be understanding the change detection. We would see why it is important to understand the change detection if you are an Angular developer. We would see what zones are. Anyone has heard about zones yet? One. Okay, great. So we'll also see if we can get rid of the change detection completely, if that's possible with Angular or not. And there would be some links and sources, so you can go home and study more. And then there would be a question answer session, hopefully short. So what is change detection? Anyone? What is change detection? 3 seconds to answer. 1 to 3. Okay. So change detection in Angular is basically detecting changes when something changes. So it doesn't seem like a very good explanation. So we'll just go ahead and see what it really is. So consider this thing. You have a lot of views in your application. There could be a header at the very top. There could be a card showing product, and it also has a model. So if you have worked with Angular, you know that there are some terminologies that we have been using since Angular 1. MVC pattern, or for Angular we called it MVW, model, view, whatever. And it basically works around model and the view. So if something changes in the view, it reflects the changes to the model. And if something changes in the model, it goes towards the view to update that. That was the one of the selling points of Angular when it came to life, because previously we had jQuery that we use for developing applications, and it did not have this. So if you had to kind of put a value from an input to a p tag or a div tag, it could take a lot of lines of code. But with Angular, it's just a few lines of code, and Angular is doing all of the efforts behind the scenes. So the question is, how does Angular detect changes? That is the question that we would be asking ourselves, or me, for instance. So people sometimes thinks it's this, which is rendering pretty slow and seems awkward as well. So if anyone can see this, this is how it should look. But anyways, so yeah, now you're working. Okay. So Angular detects changes via something called zones. And anyone has idea of zones? No, there was only one person. So consider this room, right? And if there are a lot of boxes floating around in this room, you have like 5 tasks to do, and for each task you just push that task to a box, and the box handles in isolation that task. Each of the boxes have no idea what other boxes are doing. So that's the concept of zones. Zone provides an execution context in JavaScript. So for every Angular component, there is a separate zone in which it executes all of the tasks in parallel, which makes it fast, right? So zones basically provide you a lot of context. And there are a lot of things that basically combine with zones, and we'll go through that really soon. The good thing about zones is that it's a library and it can be extended. So Angular basically extended zones to apply some custom events that Angular wanted. And whenever an event happens inside the browser, the zone helps detecting changes. So in the prior days, in the Angular 1.x world, the changes were detected periodically, like one cycle completed and then next cycle executed. But with zones, whenever something happens in the browser, then the change detection is occurred. So for instance, you click a button, that's a browser event, right? You scroll, that's a browser event, right? So in these kind of event, Zone.js provides a handler where Angular patches its own functionality for detecting changes, patching the view from the model to view, and then view to model. And we'll see how that actually works in terms of code as well. So again, Angular extends the global zone of Zone.js, and then it patches some behaviors using something which we call ng-zone. So the Angular zone is called ng-zone. If you want to see the code, this is the actual source code of Angular where it all happens. Everyone can see this clearly or not? How many people don't see this clearly? One. Okay, one. You can ask the person beside you. So it says application ref, which is your overall application. There is an array of change detector refs. For each component that you create, Angular creates a change detector reference. That change detector is responsible for detecting changes. So here what happens is that it actually creates the ng-zone wrapper. So whenever something happens, Angular goes here and executes this function called this.tick. So consider it like this. Whenever you click something, any button or any place on the view, it goes here, it calls this function this.tick. And what it does is that inside here, it loops through all of the change detector references, and it calls each detector's detect changes method. So that's what it does. Whenever you do something, it goes to the array of all the detectors, and then it runs the chain detection for each of the detector that's there. Make sense to everyone? Kind of theoretically? Perfect. We'll see this visually also, which would be interesting, hopefully. So the question is Zone.js your best friend now? So how many people think this is the best thing that Angular could do? Okay, one. Everyone thinks Zone.js is a bad idea or not? How many people think Zone.js is bad? No one. Zone.js is a saint. Okay. So that's not accurate at all. Okay, this is renting, right? So Zone.js, so basically consider this situation. You have like a list of 1,000 users on your view, right? Once you get the data from the back end and you paste that data on the front end, you know that nothing is going to change on that overall list of 1,000 components, because it's a list you would put ng for, and each component would be rendered separately, of course, and then each component has its own context and a change detector, right? So if you know that the data is not going to change, what's the point of running change detection, right? But Zone.js does not know that, because you are the programmer, Zone.js is not. So Zone.js still executes change detection on every single event that happens. Every set timeout, you can see the list here. Every set timeout, every click event, every key up, every add event listener, whatever is posted on the browser. So all of the events that are on browser, Zone.js will detect changes on that, even if you are scrolling something. So if you have a list of a lot of elements, that means that you are currently in a performance loss situation, because Zone.js is running constantly the change detections. So that is something that we are discussing here, and that is the main idea of this. So Zone.js basically uses something which is called monkey patching. So for every handler, Zone.js runs its own function. In the end, Angular runs its own function after Zone.js function because of ngZone. That's that code that I show you. So a lot of things to remember is, as we discussed, these are the things that actually trigger Zone.js functions: set timeout, set interval, any HTTP call that you would make, or XHR calls, click, mouse move, mouse down, submit. All of those things would run change detection for you, right? So one thing that we usually get regarding change detection is whenever you are using third-party libraries, right, which are not inside Angular. So a third-party library not inside Angular did something to your model. Now Angular does not know that it changed, right? Because Angular only sees what's inside the Angular's code. So if you did anything outside of Angular and now we have to run those changes inside Angular, there's a function run inside Angular, and then if you want something to take out of Angular, like if there's a performance heavy situation, for instance, you have to run a timer, right? There's a clock, and on the clock you have to constantly change the view. Of course the seconds are changing, but since set timeout triggers zone and zone triggers change detection, that means for every second there would be a change detection. Now you might not probably want that. If there are a lot of code inside there and you don't want that to trigger the change detection, you can use this function run outside of Angular to do that. And that would stop the change detection, which means it would stop binding the view to the model. So when anything changes in the model, it won't reflect it to the view. And there are certain situations where you actually want that, and we'll see some examples as well. So let's go through what were the improvements in Angular. So if you talk about Angular.js, the change detection was pretty messy. Any component could, trigger the digest cycle, what we called it, and it would then go and update any component. So there wasn't a predictable flow of the overall change detection. Whereas in Angular, it's pretty different. So the direction of change detection in Angular is through its tree. So it starts from the very top, and then it goes really to the very depth. How many people among you have worked with Angular for like an year? One. Okay, right. So I did not go into very depth of this because of the same reason, just to make you understand it. So consider an event fired at the very bottom of the tree, right? And when we are talking about trees, your app is the main node, it's the top node. Then you might have a header at the very top, and then you might have the content below the header. So that's how the trees or the nodes are created. Even the HTML elements are created this way. So if an event is fired at the very depth of a node, then what would happen is that it would trigger the topmost view reference, and then it would trigger the child, and then it would go all the way down. So that's how the change detection works in Angular. So some key points here. The flow is always from root component to the child component. There is no global digestion cycles like Angular. In Angular, if there was even a single change, all of the components were updated. All of the components were updated, and there wasn't a flow there. And we can control the change detection in Angular. We could not control it in Angular, but we can control it in Angular. So the question is Angular's change detection smart? We already know that it's not, because of Zone.js, right? You can turn it off completely. You can even turn off Zone.js completely and do your own change detection, and we'll see how that works as well. So first of all, Angular's change detection is not smart because it doesn't know which content is going to change, which content is not going to change. So you have to tell that to the Angular. And if you can see the code, which you probably cannot, I will try to zoom this a bit. I don't think it zooms in Google Sheets, right? It doesn't. Sorry? I could try something that doesn't work. Oh, okay, it's fine. By the way, all of my codes are in black. I don't like white. Right. So let's go forward and not waste any time here. So the question is, how can we control the change detection? How can we make our application more smart? I'm gonna cover these two things: immutable objects and change detector ref. Not gonna cover observables. It's pretty simple. You can learn it on your own. So first off, we have Immutable.js for change detection, and I don't know why it's like this. Probably, not sure. Seems a bit weird here. यहाँ पे थोड़ा अच्छा लग रहा है बिल्कुल. Mac को नहीं करवा. This is the best. Well, okay. Nothing to do about that. Okay, no problem. Okay. So I'm gonna jump into the code and then we can see how it works here. Yes, sure. I'm gonna see if I'm missing anything. I did a lot of efforts making this one, by the way. You can at least see the arrows, right? Right. And the GIFs, of course. Okay, so I'm gonna go right into the code and show you how things are done. So a few examples here. I'm gonna zoom this a bit. So first of all, I talked about things that we could run outside of Angular, right? If there's a heavy processing stuff that's on your code and you are running set timeout or set interval, so you might want to consider placing the processing out of Angular, right? And a simple example is that when I move my mouse, you can see that the circle is moving along with it, and you can also see the coordinates at the very bottom. So whenever I'm kind of triggering the mouse move event, and then it triggers Zone.js, and then it triggers Angular, which is updating things on the view. Now, if I want to kind of exclude Zone.js in this overall situation, what would happen? Zone.js function would not trigger, and in turn, Angular would not update the view. So I'm going to click run outside of Angular, and now you can see I'm moving the mouse, but nothing is happening. So if I go to the very bottom, the top left bottom, and then I turn it on, you can see my cursor is there, because behind the scenes, the components model was being updated. The value of the variables were being updated, but the view was not changing because I excluded Zone.js out of it, right? So there may be situations where you want that, and you can just use run outside of Angular to do that. The next thing I want to share is the change detection visually, and this is something that I really found interesting when I was building this. So these are pure HTML CSS elements, no graph, nothing, something I made, and it shows how the change detection actually happens. So when I trigger changes, you can see that it starts from the very top and then goes to the very bottom. So it's a tree of nodes, right? And it actually reflects what the usual application is. So whenever I click somewhere, you can see that even if I click outside for once, it triggers the change detection. If I click on the button, it triggers. If I click outside somewhere, it also triggers the change detection, while I do not want it to be. So if I turn on the spinners, you can see what happens. So the value of the spinner is changing for each component. You can see the spinners right around the circles. So you can see that even for a spinner, for its progress, how many times the change detection is being run for your application. And you can kind of have an idea of what would happen if this was the situation with a lot of list of users for your application, where you wouldn't want Angular to run all of the change detection. Because when we are talking about running change detection, that means running JavaScript code. Running JavaScript code means performance, right? So I'm gonna stop this, and I'm gonna show the code that really has this working. Is this kind of clearer? Everyone can see this, right? So I have these pages, change detection tree, and what I'm doing here is just creating a list of nodes, and I have this component here in the tree node component, and here I have this input, the node. So each block that you see, this is a node, and the overall view that you have here is combined with a lot of nodes together. Anyways, so what happens is that this is a variable or a property, show spinner. This is false. When I click on the button, it actually starts incrementing the value of the spinner here. So it basically increments the value and takes it to 100% and then redoes the same thing. So you can see that for performance measures, what I'm doing here is I'm running outside of Angular this set interval code. And then when I want to change the value and show it to the view, then I'm going here and I'm updating the value. So this is an example of how you can run things outside of Angular. This is a very simple thing. Now for performance measures, what we can do is that we can use something called on push. If you know that the value of your component would not change frequently and you want to kind of make your component immutable. How many people know about immutability? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So in simple words, you have a JavaScript object named user, right? User has a first name and a last name. If you directly go and change user.firstname equals to something, that means you have mutated the object, right? For immutability, what you would do is that you will create another object, a new object, change the first name of the new object and then assign it to the first variable. So you are basically, what you are doing is that you are creating a new value and you are going into the memory and replacing the value on the memory location of the previous variable. So you are kind of changing it. So when the value changes, or if you are creating a new variable and the new memory location is assigned to a variable, then it is considered that you have created a new object rather than changing the properties. So that actually makes it possible for us to predict the state of different variables. So if you know that the input values will never change, for instance, you have a list of users, right? The users list is initially an empty array. Now you fetch the API, fetch the data from the API and then assign new users array to your model. Now you have changed the whole array, right? This is the first time that you have done it. Now, if you don't change anything to any of the inputs, Angular will not run any change detection if you apply the on push strategy, which means that you are telling Angular that this is gonna run for the first time only. Or this would run when we change the overall input of the property that we are targeting, for instance users. So that's what I have done here. I've created two components. One is tree node it basically has nothing defined here, but I'm going to compare this with the other one. Just give me a sec. I also have this another component which is tree node on push. So if I open this, um, you can see that we have put change detection here, which is set to change detection strategy on push. So this on push basically allows us to say if the node is not changed, do not do anything. Do not run change detection, right? And we'll see how this works in real time. So I'm now on the on push strategy. If I trigger change detection, you can see there is nothing being changed here, right? But if I reset, then you can see the change detection happening. So in the reset function, what I've done is that I replace the overall tree nodes. So now another array or another structure is assigned to the same variable. I have not gone into the code and changed a particular node. I've replaced the overall object. So when you replace the overall object, then the change detection will run, otherwise it won't run. So now you have the power to tell Angular, do not run the change detection every time something happens on the browser, and just do it when the whole variable changes, or when the properties change, the whole variable changes. Same thing. So in terms of the progress spinners, if I turn this on, you can see that it runs only for the first time. The show spinner property here is an input. It is coming from the parent. So when I click this button, it changes the value of show spinner. That's why we see a change detection running. But nothing inside will change what we see here. So for instance, if I turn this off, it runs. If I turn this on, it runs. But you can see now you are also seeing this spinner here. The spinner behind the scenes is currently changing. It's currently in the loop, but you don't see it. But whenever something changes, then you see it. So you can see if I turn this off and on often, you can see that it is changing behind the scenes. So if I stopped it, I turn this on, it's at the very start, I'm waiting for a while, close, open, and you can see it's halfway. So it's changing behind the scenes, but the view is not reflecting it because I want it that way. Okay. Now, the final one, change detection ref. This is something that I thought about, and what I'm doing here is that I can tell my code. Good. So I can tell my code if I want to disable change detection on a component completely, not on immutability, nothing. I don't want any change detection on this component. If something is just a view, just keep it as a view, right? So right now, if I trigger change detection, I hope you can all see this huge tree. So if I trigger, you can see it goes all the way down, right? Everyone with me? Anyone asleep? Everyone awake? Okay, good. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to disable the left tree. Like if you see the mouse, it's this node with 2. I'll disable this one, and let's see what happens then. So if I click trigger, you can see that it just goes towards that 2 and never goes to the children of 2. Can you all see that? Similarly, I can disable the right tree, which means it will not go now to this whole tree, the depth 3 and 4. So as I said in the beginning, the change detection flow is always from the root to the child nodes. So if I disable a child in the middle, that means that change detection would be disabled on that component as well as on any child or any children. So that's how you can disable the change detection completely, and you can in fact detach and reattach the change detector reference. So you can turn it off anytime, and then after some logic maybe in your code, you can check the condition and then reattach the change detector so it works as before. What I've done in the zone stuff as well. So yeah, that's pretty much it about the change detection scenario. So the key points that we would take away from this overall slide is, if I count it on my fingers, one would be the on-push strategy that you can use. The second thing is immutability, that you have to replace the overall array, and if you have heard about NGRX, that basically works around this concept, right? You have to, every time you change something, you have to either replace the overall array or the overall object. And change detector ref, so you can detach any change detector from its component, and then you can reattach it on your own will. So these are some links that would be really helpful if you go and read this. There's a really good article about change detection Angular on SidePoint. It basically goes in depth on what actually triggers the change detection, where is the component, where's the view, how it's all handled in the source code of Angular. So you can actually go there. I've also pasted my links. I'm probably sure that we are going to share that on Angular Pakistan as well. So yeah, that would be it. Any questions?